Okay, so when you hear the name Eva Perón, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably a famous musical, right? A tragic, beautiful icon? Well, in this explainer, we're going to push right past all of that. We're going to uncover the political powerhouse, the revolutionary strategist that the source material shows us she was. A figure way more complex, and frankly, more powerful than you probably imagined.
So that's the big question, isn't it? Who was the real Eva Perón? We're going to put the story we all think we know, the one that always seems to focus on her tragic death, right next to the story of her absolutely incredible political life.
You can really break it down into these two Evas. Over on the left, you've got the pop culture version we all know, the tragic icon, the stuff of musicals and dramas. But on the right, that's the Eva you find in the historical records. She's a hardcore political strategist, a master of union politics. Her story isn't about death. It's about a relentless political life.
So how did she get all this power? Well, here's what's so important to understand. It wasn't just because she was married to the president. Not even close. She went out and methodically built her own massive power base, completely separate from the role of a typical first lady.
And what's so wild about this is how she did it. Get this, she never held a single official government job. Not an elected position, not an appointed one, nothing. Everything she accomplished was by creating her own institutions and inspiring loyalty completely outside of the official government.
Now, to really wrap your head around her power, you first have to see how the Peronist movement itself was structured. Think of it like a three-legged stool. You had the men's political party, you had the women's political party, and you had the gigantic confederation of labor unions known as the CGT. And this is the absolute key. Eva Perón didn't just participate, she personally founded and led one of those three branches, the Women's Party. And she also had total control over a second one, the unions, because its leader was completely loyal to her. So you do the math. She was in direct command of 2/3 of the entire movement. That is just a staggering amount of institutional power. But look, she wasn't just some manager sitting on top of the structure. Oh no, within the whole Peronist movement, which had a lot of different factions, Eva was consistently the most radical voice in the room. She was always the one pushing the boundaries, always wanting to go further.
And there is no better example of this than what happened right after a failed military coup in 1951. It was this huge moment of crisis, and it just threw a spotlight on the massive political differences between her and her husband, the president.
I mean, the contrast was night and day. Juan Perón played it cool. He was the president, so he chose moderation. He pardoned the guys who led the coup to try and calm things down. Eva's reaction? Something else entirely. She secretly went to the Dutch ambassador and tried to buy thousands of automatic weapons. Her plan was to arm the workers, the unions, and create her own loyal militia.
And that kind of radical thinking, well, that's exactly why her bid to become vice president got shut down. Her ambition, and especially her plan to arm the working class, was seen as a major threat by pretty much everyone with power: the military, the church, and even the more conservative politicians inside her own movement.
This brings us to another really complicated and often misunderstood part of her story: her relationship with feminism. And trust me, it is not a simple topic. So let's just ask it directly. Was Eva Perón a feminist? Well, the answer from the sources is, it's complicated. It's not a simple yes or no. She had her own very particular vision of what women's liberation should be. On the one hand, she famously clashed with the established feminist leaders of her day, who were often upper class, and she wasn't a fan of what she saw as elitist European movements. But then, you just look at what she actually did. She's the one who got women the right to vote. She built the country's first truly powerful all-female political party, and she's the one who brought working-class women into the halls of power for the very first time.
So how do we make sense of that? Well, the term the sources use is popular feminism. For Eva, the fight for women's rights was completely tied to the fight for economic justice for the poor and the working class. You couldn't have one without the other. They were two sides of the same coin.
And she really said it best herself. For her, a feminism that only helps rich women wasn't feminism at all. The whole point of empowering women, in her eyes, was to build a more just world for absolutely everyone.
So after all this, how can we get past the myths and find this radical political Eva? Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. The best way is to just skip the movies and the musicals and go straight to the source, to her own words.
And lucky for us, she left behind two incredibly important books. The first is The Reason for My Life, And listen, don't think of it like some fluffy First Lady memoir. It is a full-on political manifesto, and it became one of the most printed books in the history of Argentina. The second book, My Message, is even more intense. She actually dictated it from her deathbed. And when you read her writing, it's crystal clear how she saw herself. She wrote, "I believe I was born for revolution. I have always lived in liberty, like the birds." Wow! I mean, that is not the voice of a passive icon. That's the voice of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they're fighting for.
Now, the story of her second book, My Message, is even crazier. It was basically a call to arms against the rich, the church, and even the people in her own party who she thought were too lukewarm. It was considered so politically explosive that after she died, it was hidden away. It was lost for 35 years and wasn't rediscovered until 1987. That's how dangerous her words were considered.
So if you really want to understand the real Eva Perón, the path is right there. You can read her manifesto, you can find translations of her revolutionary last message, and thanks to the internet, you can actually go online and listen to her incredible speeches in her own voice.
And all of this leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? Eva Perón's story is a pretty dramatic case, but it really makes you wonder, how many other important figures from history do we only think we know, just because we've only ever heard the myths, and we've never actually sought out their own true voice?